Okay, good morning, everyone. How are we doing this morning? Who's here? I see Baha's here, or at least he was before me. Good morning, Baha. Good morning, Duong. Good morning, Monica. And Thika, good morning. And Erica, good morning to you. Good morning, KC. Good morning, Karen. Good morning, Jimmy and Ivan. And Mashid, good morning. And Benamir's here. Good morning, Benamir. And Jenna's here. Hello, Jenna. Um, yeah, that's good. I'm sure a few more people will trickle through um, or trickle in a minute. Hope everyone had a good weekend. Weather was okay, right? Weather was pretty nice yesterday, right? Um, so today, what we'll do is we'll talk just a little bit more about oppression and power, and then we'll talk a little bit more about privilege, which we did talk about on Friday, but I feel maybe we didn't quite get where we needed to go. So we'll talk about that. And good morning, Justin. And then we should be ready to start in with the racism stuff tomorrow, I would think. And so I may have a little homework for you to do, just a little reflection thing, a really quick thing at the end. Yeah, I may have something for you to do at the end, but we'll get there. It'll be really simple. Okay, so I think I'm gonna dive right in. Okay, so on, well, not just on Friday, but all last week, we were talking about oppression and we were talking about power, right? And we said that oppression was a set of policies or practices or traditions or norms or definitions or explanations that work together to give benefits to one group and deny benefits to another, right? And we said that the dominant group is the one who has power and is benefited by this oppression, and the minoritized group is disadvantaged by it, okay? And we said that oppression is different than prejudice or discrimination, right? Prejudice and discrimination often happens on a one-to-one basis, right? So somebody can hold a certain prejudice, they might think a certain way about people that belong to a certain social group, they might discriminate against them in one way or another, but oppression is a different thing. And oppression is a situation where one group's prejudice is backed up by legal authority, historical, social, and institutional power. Okay? And so this is an important distinction, that oppression is different than prejudice and discrimination. Okay? And it's one that lots of people confuse, that lots of people get wrong. Even just this weekend, there were, I guess late last week, I guess is when it really was. There were two fairly prominent figures in Canada who screwed this up. One was Stockwell Day, who's a former politician and was on the board of directors for TELUS, and another is Rex Murphy, and Rex is a columnist, a writer for the National Post, among other things. And both of those people, Stockwell Day and Rex Murphy, both of them denied that there is systemic racism in Canada. Okay, and Rex Murphy wrote a big article, and Stockwell Day made some comments, I think, in front of the microphone, which didn't turn out very well for him. But the problem is that these two, I think, are kind of are confusing prejudice and discrimination with oppression, right? And so oppression is something that is built into how society works. And again, nobody really has to do anything in order for this to happen. Okay, so one example, let me just give you this is probably a bad example. If we were to play a board game, good morning, Krish. If we were to play a board game like Monopoly, and we all sat around the board, I know there's like 20 of us, but pretend we could all play. If we all sat around the board and we all played Monopoly, except when we start off, we all get a certain amount of money, okay? So let's say we all get $200 at the beginning of our Monopoly game. If you don't know how Monopoly is played, I apologize for this. Let's say we all get $200 at the beginning, okay? And when we move around the board, we roll one dice, right? So we get to move anywhere from 1 to 6 places, okay? We're all going to play Monopoly. We're all going to play by the rules, except Mashid and Jimmy and Erica. Okay, Mashid, Jimmy, and Erica. Those 3 players are going to start with $500, and when they get to roll the dice, they get to roll 2, not just 1. So they could actually go anywhere from 1 to 12 squares, where the rest of us can only go 1 to 6. So my question to you is who's most likely to win our game of Monopoly? Do we all have an equal chance of winning? Or are some players more likely to win than others? What do you think? We all started out with $200 and we get 1 roll of the dice, except for Mashid and Jimmy and Erica. These 3 players get $500 to start and they get to roll 2 dice. Who do you think is going to win? Bob says, yeah, there's a much better chance that Jimmy or Erica or who's my third one? Jimmy, Erica, or Mashid. There's a much better chance that those 3 players are going to win. Now, are they cheating? So if Mashid wins, is Mashid cheating? No, she just started out with more. Right? Is she playing the game wrong? No, she's just playing the game as it's supposed to be played. Is she a bad person? No, she's not a bad person. Yeah, they have a much higher chance of winning. Good morning, Caleb. Yeah, these 3 have a much higher chance of winning, but it doesn't mean that these 3 players are doing anything wrong. It doesn't mean that they're cheating, and it doesn't mean that they are bad people. It just means that they started off in an advantageous position, whereas many of us did not. And so, yeah, they might lose the game, right? It's very possible that none of these players will win the game of Monopoly, but the chances are much better that they will win than any of us, right? And again, this has to do with the way that the game is played and the advantages that these 3 players started out with. And so again, they don't have to do anything. They don't have to cheat. They don't have to be bad people. They just start out in a better position than everyone else does. And so that makes it much more likely that they're going to succeed. Okay, and we'll dig into that a little bit more as we go. Okay, but I hope that's a useful metaphor. Okay. So we said, of course, there's all kinds of different oppressions that are possible in society, and the minoritized and dominant groups that you have in your society are specific to your society, right? So this little chart here has to do with how oppression works, mostly in Western countries and in countries like Canada and the US. In Canada and the US, for instance, the dominant group are white people, right? But again, if you go to China, the dominant group is not white people, right? The dominant group is Chinese people. So the groups that you're talking about depends on the country that you're in to some degree. And so this chart really only works for kind of Canada and US, and things are a little bit different depending on where you go. But that said, there's always a dominant group and there's always minoritized groups. Okay, there's always groups that have power and groups that do not. Okay, so even though who is in the dominant group and who is in the minoritized group changes depending on where you are in the world, and when too, if you're looking at this historically, even though those things change, there's always an unequal relationship. Okay. And also keep in mind that all of us as individuals, we can be in a mix of dominant and minoritized groups, right? We might be We might be a person of color, for instance, but we might be a man, right? We might be heterosexual, but we might be a Muslim. We might be able-bodied, but we might be a recent immigrant. And so we might have a mix of pieces of our identity in which we are sometimes in the dominant group. Good morning, Manish. Sometimes in the dominant group and sometimes in minoritized groups, okay? And so which of those identities is important will vary, will change, okay? But we'll try to deal with that as we go. Yeah, so oppression involves control of society's institutions. And so remember, institutions were things like the government, education, the media, the police, which is very prominently in the news right now. Having control of those means that you are able to create the society in the way that you want it to be, okay? And so again, no individual member of the dominant group has to do anything specific in order to oppress a member of a minoritized group. And so, again, with the Monopoly example, Mashid and Jimmy and Erica, they don't have to do anything specific in order to have a better chance of winning the game. They just go about playing the game as all of us do, but they just have advantages that not everyone has, right? And so they can, they're much more likely to succeed than anyone else. And again, prejudice and discrimination is built into the society as a whole and becomes automatic, normalized, and taken for granted. So if you imagine, for instance, that with the Monopoly game, what if we couldn't really tell, all of us players, how many dice were being rolled at the same time, or how much money everyone received at the beginning of the game, right? In real life, we'd all hand out the money and you'd be able to see it and it would be clear that these three players had more money. But what if we couldn't tell? What if everyone just got an envelope at the beginning of the game and we had no clue? We didn't know how much money everyone had. And what if when you rolled the dice, you kind of did it behind a shield so that nobody could see? Well, then we wouldn't really see the disadvantage, right? We would just see everyone playing the game. We would see Mashid and Erica and Jimmy just playing the game as normal, but it wouldn't be quite so obvious that they had advantages that others did not, okay? And so again, often we don't see this oppression, this type of oppression taking place unless we kind of really look for it, okay? All right, so this is new. This is new. There's kind of four key elements to oppression, and we've kind of mentioned them very quickly. I just want to mention them in a little more detail now, and we'll come back to them as we look at different types of oppression. So as we look at racism, as we look at sexism, etc., we will touch on these aspects of oppressive relationships again and again, okay? But I'm just going to mention them here, and hopefully they'll make enough sense for us to move forward with them, but let's see how it is. So one aspect of oppression is that it is historical, okay? So the power relationships between dominant and minoritized groups are historical, and so there are, in any society that you go to, there are historical reasons why certain groups are in power. And so if you look at North American society, if you look at Canada and the US, white people are the dominant group here. And they are because of a history of colonization and cultural and physical genocide. Europeans came to this continent and took over, right? And they pushed other people aside. And so the fact that white people have power in North America, because white people have power in North America, there are historical reasons for that. And actually we'll We'll dig into those historical reasons a little bit later this week. But it's not by accident, right? There is a reason why this is the case, right? And it has to do with historical events and what's happened here. Now, that history has resulted in the spread of numerous ideologies and institutional structures and cultural norms that privilege dominant groups. So, I'll talk about that in a second. The other aspect of this is that long histories of oppression are difficult to reverse, okay? So the longer that a certain relationship exists, the more difficult it is to see it happening, okay? Because it's the way that things have always been. So it's very difficult to challenge it that way. And it's also very difficult to overcome it, okay? Because beliefs that people have held for a long time, for generations maybe, are difficult to overturn. The way that inequality is built into society in terms of laws and policies and how things are constructed, and we'll talk about that just a little bit later, those are difficult to reverse too, right? So the longer you have an unequal situation, the more difficult it is to dismantle, okay? Because again, it's been around for a long time, people are used to it and they're not used to questioning it, and a lot of little decisions are made along the way that create that sort of support that inequality. And again, it becomes very difficult to change because it's not just one thing, it's a huge amount of things. And actually that's kind of what we're going to bump into with the protests around racism and George Floyd's death and so on that we see in the United States, is that people want change, and that's good, and things need to change, but it's not going to be easy. There are a lot of things wrong in the United States and in Canada as well. I won't exempt Canada, but just to talk about the US, there are a lot of things wrong in the US that need to be repaired. And so changing one or two things is not going to remedy racism in the US, okay? Doesn't mean that things shouldn't be done. Things should be done. But it's going to take a lot of work. There are a lot of reasons for a lot of things led to the death of George Floyd a couple weeks ago. And so, should we put body cameras on police? Yeah, we should, right? Should we change measures of accountability? Yeah, we should. Should we defund and demilitarize the police? Yeah, we probably should. Will that solve the problem? No. Will it help? Definitely. So the problem is that there's a lot to look at, and one simple thing does not change oppression when you have a very long history of it. Okay, we'll dig back into that as we look at each type of oppression that we examine. But I just want to bring it up now, is that it's important to remember that oppression is historical. Okay, it's usually in place for certain reasons. There's historical events that have contributed to it, and the longer it's been around, the more difficult it is to reverse. And again, the way things have always been, or the way things have always been done, this is often an easy out for people to not look critically at the situation in front of them. But it's not very good support for any argument, right? That we've always done it this way is not a good premise, but for some people, they like to use it anyway. The second one here is that oppression is ideological. Okay, now ideologies are big shared ideas of a society, and they help to explain or rationalize or justify why society is the way it is and why there are inequalities. Okay, so these ideas are really, really big. Okay, they're really broad. We find them woven into all the institutions in society. And so because you are exposed to this ideology all the time, it's very hard to avoid believing, okay? Um, so there's a few here I've listed at the bottom: meritocracy, individualism, democracy, capitalism, patriotism, etc. So these are really big ideologies in society, okay? One that we will bump into quite a bit is one called meritocracy, okay? And meritocracy is important, and I think even though you might not know what the word means, I think you probably have a sense of what it is, okay? So let me ask you a quick question. What's the secret to getting straight A's in school? What's the secret? And if you don't know the secret, then just you can guess. But what's the secret to getting straight A's in school? Or to getting good marks, let's say. What's the secret? Okay, so Erica says study hard. Casey, okay, studying hard. Okay, good. Okay, pay attention. Good. Boz says cheating, doing nothing in your life other than studying. Okay, so there's two ways, right? The honest way and the dishonest way. All right. Cheating doesn't work. We know. I'm sorry. It's easy to see. Listen to me. Okay, that's good. Yeah, this is usually what people say. Okay, so how do you get good marks in school? How do you get straight A's? Well, you need to study hard. You need to pay attention. Don't cheat, but spend a lot of your time studying. Listen to the teacher. Do a lot of work. Right? That's how you succeed. And I think for the most part, if you asked people in general society, so if you asked them outside of school and you said, how do you get ahead in life? How do you succeed? How do you achieve all of your dreams and wants and things that you want to accomplish? How do you do that? Those people would say pretty much exactly the same things that you've said. And so they'd say work hard, pay attention to what you're doing, spend most of your time doing work, right? So there's this ideology of hard work equals success. Okay, that's the kind of value that is underlying what you've said here, and probably what most people would say out in society. If you want to be successful, you need to work hard. And so that's kind of the idea of meritocracy in a very brief summary, in a little nutshell, is that if you work hard, you will be successful. And the opposite way, people who are successful are people who have worked hard. Okay? Now, this is an ideology that circulates in many of our societies. We see it in all kinds of different social institutions. And so here in school, I think we've been pretty clearly taught that if you work hard, you will be successful. And the students who are successful are the ones who've worked hard. Education has taught us that. If we go out into the world, we see it in the world of work sometimes. We see it in the media, right? People the media kind of venerates people who are successful and attributes it to their hard work. We see that in entertainment programming. We see it in fictional TV shows and movies. We see it in music. There's actually a number of hip hop songs that talk a lot about, if you want to be successful, you've got to work hard, right? And I'm thinking of one, but it's got a bad word in it, so I won't reference it. But we see these messages over and over again. If you want to be successful, you got to work hard. And people who are successful, those people have worked hard. So that's meritocracy. But is that true? Are successful people, are they only successful because they've worked hard? Or is working hard the only way to be successful? What do you think? Are there other variables in success? Are there other variables to success? Are there other things that play a role in whether someone is successful or not? And if they are successful, is it only because they have worked so hard? What do you think? What do you think? Okay. So Karen says having talent, right? So if you want to be really successful at something, you need some talent. Jarek says hello. Hello, Jarek. Nice to have you here. Baha says no. So give me more. Are there other variables to being successful, or do you just need to work hard? And on the reverse, are people who are successful, is it just because they have worked really, really hard? Manish says yes. Believing in yourself actually worth the success. Okay. Tika says not really. Honesty is important. Okay. Tika says do not give up. Okay. So persistence is important. Sam says being confident. Okay. Absolutely, Jarek. Give me what you got. Give me what you got. This is very interesting, by the way. Other variables in success. Is it just hard work and confidence and perseverance and honesty? Is that all it is? Or is there more? Okay. I want to come back to, okay, Jarek says, I think some people are successful because of background. Okay. So Jarek probably knows where I'm going here because he's taken this class before. For example, Donald Trump. Okay. So let's think about, I'm going to call Karen's thing up here too. So Karen's comment here is interesting because it has to do with something about us that is outside our control, right? If you are talented at something, you can't really change that, right? You can't get more talent. You can work harder, and that might, if you're talking about maybe playing the violin, you might have a certain amount of talent for it. You might practice really hard. You might get the best teacher you can find and work as hard as you can at being the best violinist you can. But really, you only have a certain amount of talent, right? You can't really get more of it in any way. Um, yeah, you can have knowledge, right? But of course, you can acquire more knowledge in theory, right? So let me go back here to Donald Trump. Now, the degree to which Trump is successful is a little bit debatable, depending on what you think success is. But I think most people would agree that he is successful, right? We all kind of know his name, although recently, maybe for bad reasons rather than good. We all know his name. He's been very economically successful, right? He seems to have a lot of money and a big fancy house at the top of Trump Tower. He's got lots of business dealings. He's got multiple homes. He plays golf all the time. And I don't know if you heard, but he recently became president of the United States. So most people would rate that as successful, right? He has been wildly successful in his life. And so the idea of meritocracy would convince us that he is so successful. Yeah, there we go. He is so successful because he's worked so hard, right? Because people who are successful have worked really hard, and maybe even if we throw this in here, and they have talent, right? So that combination has taken them to the top. But if you look at Donald Trump, that's not entirely true. He has been a businessman for most of his life, throwing around lots of money and making big business deals with people. But if you look at his background, he was born into a very wealthy family, right? His parents had a wealthy real estate business, and so he was a millionaire when he was 8 years old, right? He was born rich. He went to fancy private schools when he was younger. He went to, I think, Wharton School of Business, which I forget what it is now, but their tuition, I think, is $80,000 a year. No, wait, is it a year or a term? Either way, wildly expensive. And then when he left college and was sort of entering the world of work, he took over his father's company, his father's successful company, changed the name of it to Trump International, and then went about using all of that money to try to build more. And so, again, meritocracy tells us that success is due to hard work, and if you're not successful, you need to work harder. But Donald Trump is kind of, in this case, like Erica and Jimmy and Masheed was playing the game of Monopoly. They kind of started out ahead, right? They started out with more than anyone else. And so I think we very intuitively determined that it was much more likely for Masheed and Jimmy and Erica to win the game of Monopoly because they started out with more and they had a better chance, right? It doesn't really matter if they're better players. Well, it might. It might matter if they're better players, but it doesn't really come down to strategy or, is Jimmy or is Erica or Masheed, are they playing harder than anyone else? No, not necessarily. They just start out with more and they have a better chance of winning. And so if you look at Donald Trump, that idea of meritocracy doesn't hold up because has he worked hard in his life? I don't know. Maybe. Do people who are working at McDonald's or are working at Walmart to support a family, do they not work hard all day? I kind of think they do. But some people become successful, right? Some people have more. And in the case of Trump, he has more because he started out with more, okay? And that just has to do with the way in which he has privilege or was privileged economically speaking or class-wise. So he comes from the upper socioeconomic class, and so that has benefited him in a number of ways that regular people wouldn't have been benefited. This is coming into privilege, but we'll get to that. But that doesn't even mention the fact that he is a man, right? Men have privilege in American society. They have power. They're the dominant group. He is white. White people are the dominant group in the US. He is vaguely Christian, or at least he's good enough at imitating it to fool people, some people. So he's kind of in all of these dominant groups, and so just like the game of Monopoly, he has advantages that other people don't have. Sometimes it's very easy to see how he's advantaged, like with the money. We can count up how much money he received from his father's business, and so it's easy to see how he's been benefited. Sometimes it's not so easy, right? He's a white man, that has benefited him, but sometimes it's hard to know exactly when and how, okay? So the point I'm going for here is that even just this one idea of meritocracy doesn't quite hold up, right? The idea that if you want to be successful, you need to work hard. If you're not successful, you need to work harder. And people who are successful, well, they got there because they worked hard. And again, there's a grain of truth to that, right? If you want to be a lawyer, you are going to have to work hard. You're going to have to go through university and law school, and you're going to pass the bar. You have to get a job. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. But the amount of work you put in is not the only element of your success. Sometimes there are other things that benefit you, okay? So meritocracy is an ideology, and it's hard to escape in our society, or in many of our societies. But it's not strictly true, right? There's an element that is true, but it's an oversimplification, okay? But again, believing this ideology allows inequality to stay in place, right? As long as we believe that people become successful by working hard, then anyone who's not successful, we don't have to consider other factors, right? It's just because they're not working hard. It doesn't have anything to do with the economic or social class they're born into. It doesn't have anything to do with their race or their gender or their religion or the fact that they are immigrants or first generation members of immigrant parents. None of that stuff matters because it's all about hard work, right? That's the ideology of meritocracy. And again, it has a grain of truth, but it's not absolutely true. But because we encounter it in so many places, because we encounter that idea in school and in government and in the media and sometimes in religion, because we encounter that idea over and over and over again, it feels true. It feels like it's something that is natural and correct. But again, there's more going on there than just your ability to work hard. And again, these ideologies have a powerful role in keeping oppression in place, right? If we don't realize that Mashid and Jimmy and Erica are benefited, then we don't question why they're winning the game, right? And when Mashid finally wins the game of Monopoly, nobody finds that strange, right? Everyone thinks it's because she must have played a good game of Monopoly. But again, that's not the reason. She may have played a good game of Monopoly, but she also started out ahead, right? She started out with more, and it was much more likely that she was going to win the game. And again, it's the same with Donald Trump. Did he work hard? Maybe, maybe not, who knows? But he definitely started out a long way ahead of most people. And it's much more likely that he was going to become president of the United States than, a random person in the US. You can see the same thing happening here. This is my example from Mean Girls with the plastics and the jocks, right? So why does everyone, let me ask you this question. Why does everyone give power to the plastics? Why are the plastics at the top of the social hierarchy in Mean Girls? Why are they the most popular, the most powerful, the most envied social group in the high school? Why is that? Because it's a little surprising if you think about it, right? Because they are not really that nice, right? They're mean, right? They're mean to other people in the school. Sometimes they're mean to their own group members, and yet somehow they are on the top of the heap. Everyone looks up to them for some reason. And yeah, why is that? Okay, so Karen says, well, because they're beautiful, right? And so what does that tell us? It says we live in a society where beauty is valued, right? And so these girls can act however they want, they can be mean to whoever they want, but people will like them anyway because they're beautiful, right? Why else? Why is this group on top of the social ladder here at the school? Okay, so Thika says they create attraction. Okay, so people are attracted to them because they're beautiful, I'm thinking. Erica says because their parents have power. Okay, so they come from wealthy or powerful families, right? So Gretchen's father is the inventor of toaster strudel. You can Google that if you don't know what it is. I don't know if they even make it anymore. He's the inventor of toaster strudel, so he's apparently a big important guy with lots of money. Erica says, yeah, because they're parents. Casey says because they're wealthy, right? So these girls, this collection of girls here in the plastics, they are beautiful. They come from families that have wealth and power. They have wealth themselves. They use that wealth to make themselves beautiful, right? They dress in all very fashionable, very expensive clothes that they walk through the school hallways in. So they kind of embody a bunch of things that the culture values. And so because of that, the Mean Girls have power in the high school. But what's interesting is that everyone seems to agree that they do without anything happening, right? There's no meeting that's held in order to see who should be the most powerful group in the school. The plastics can't make people look up to them and respect them and like them. They can't make them do that. Everyone just kind of seems to agree in the school that they are at the top. And again, we did that too, right? Because when we started watching the movie, we very quickly realized that they were at the top of the social hierarchy. We just kind of instinctively knew that. Well, this is the thing. So Boss says they have convinced everyone that they are better than them, and when new students come, they'll just go with the flow. Exactly. But the plastics don't have to do too much to convince people, because again, there's ideologies that, beauty deserves respect, that power deserves respect, that money, having lots of money, deserves respect. And so these are all ideologies that students and that us probably have learned and have internalized. And we may have even internalized an idea that, we just instinctively know that the pretty fashionable girls are really popular, and so they're at the top of the social hierarchy. We may have even absorbed that idea. And so when those girls kind of walk through the school, they just kind of do what they do, and everyone else does what they do too, because everyone has sort of absorbed these same ideologies about who gets respect, who gets power, and who should be at the top. And so the interesting thing is that I agree with you here, Baha, that students just come in and go with the flow. I think that happens. But I don't think the plastics have to do much to convince people at all. I think people are already convinced. The plastics just have to act as if they're on top, which they are. So those are ideologies. People have beliefs about things and then they act on them. And so the plastics are on the top of the social hierarchy simply because people kind of believe that's where they should go. There's no rules that say that they have to be. And because of these ideologies, it means that you cannot end any kind of oppression just by passing a law. Okay? And so, because inequality is in people's heads, because they think it and feel it and they've absorbed ideologies regarding inequality, you can't just say that you can't just pass a law and have it go away. And again, that's really what's going to be very difficult about dealing with racism in the United States and in Canada. But that's what's going to be very difficult going forward, is that you can't just pass a law and then it's over. In Canada, for instance, in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is part of our Constitution, it says that you may not discriminate against anyone based on their gender, their sexuality, their race, their ethnicity, their religion. It says right there, it is illegal, you cannot do it. Does it happen anyway? Yeah, unfortunately it does, because law is not enough, right? Law is not enough. You have to change ideology. Unfortunately, it's much easier to pass a law than it is to change ideologies within society. Yeah, so this is kind of what I said, or what I was attempting to say anyway, is that oppression becomes embedded in our consciousness. It becomes embedded in our minds. And so once people become socialized to how society works, they simply go, like Baha said, they go with the flow. They go along with it. And so the plastics are at the top of the social hierarchy because we know that's just where they go. That's just how things are, right? People like Mashid and Erica and Jimmy, they win games of Monopoly because that's just who tends to win games of Monopoly, right? And so as a result, people start to play their parts and they start to see these things as normal because of ideologies. Okay. I think we've been kind of working hard for a little while here, and I think it's probably time for a little break. So take a break, stretch your legs, get some coffee or whatever you need. Come on back here in 10 minutes and we'll tie up this thing, okay? So I'll see you in just a little bit. Okay, people, and we're back. So far we've talked about two of the characteristics of oppression. One, that it is historical, so it has a long history. Dominant groups are in power because of historical events, and because of that long history, sometimes it becomes difficult um, to create an equal society after the fact, because so many things have been put in place, so many decisions have been made, that dismantling this unequal system is not just a matter of changing one thing or two things. It's actually a whole lot of things. Okay. Um, the other part of oppression being historical is the idea that the longer things are a certain way, the more people come to see them as just the way things are. Right? They have no experience with a different situation, and it becomes very difficult to imagine what a different situation would be like, because things have just been a certain way for so long. Okay, so oppression is a historical fact. Oppression is also ideological. Okay, so inequalities are based on big ideas that we all believe, and so we talked about meritocracy, the idea that if you believe that success is due to hard work, then you don't really have to think about any other reasons why someone might be successful, or another person might be unsuccessful, right? And so if you see, you know, if you see a person who's unsuccessful, a person who's struggling, it's just because they're not working hard enough, right? And you don't have to question how their race or ethnicity or gender or sexuality or religion, you don't have to question how those things might be disadvantageous to them in the society they live in. You don't have to examine how society might be creating barriers to their being successful, right? And so meritocracy is seductive. It's a nice idea to believe in, and it's easy to believe in part because there is some truth to it, right? If someone is a doctor or a lawyer, they had to work hard to become that, right? You can't do those things without hard work, and so if you want to be successful, hard work is an important aspect of it, but it's not the only part of it. But the ideology of meritocracy tells you that it is, right? Hard work is the only way to succeed. And again, partly true, but there are other factors involved as well. And so if we want an equitable society, if we want equality for people, we have to look at other things, not just people's hard work, but other factors that are outside of their control and that can create obstacles for them. Okay. The third one here is that we'll talk about is that oppression is institutional. And so again, we said that social institutions are kind of pieces of our culture that help it to operate. And so if you wanted to think of social institutions in a society, you could think of almost like organs within your body. And so your heart and your stomach and your intestines and your liver, all of those organs have a different function, but they all work together to keep you alive. And so social institutions are very similar. They're all a little bit different, but they work together in order to keep society working. And one of the ways in which they do this is that they teach us things. They teach us social values and norms and beliefs. And so the issue here, or the way that this works with oppression, is that pretty much all social institutions in all societies are controlled by the dominant group. And so if you look at the military, if you look at medicine, if you look at media, if you look at the criminal justice system, if you look at policing, if you look at finance, if you look at industry, higher education, religion, science, if you look at those social institutions, for example, in Canada and the US, you will find that basically all of those institutions are controlled by white men. Okay. And again, that's because white people and men are both dominant groups in society. And so those are the people who are controlling those institutions. And so as a result, those are the people who are able to build society the way they want it to be. They're the ones that are able to take their ideas and structure society according to them. Okay. And so, again, this can be, the building of society in a way that advantages dominant groups and disadvantages minoritized groups can be conscious or unconscious. So people can be doing it on purpose, or people can be doing it by accident. Both are possible. But again, social institutions are usually controlled by the dominant group, and usually that results in advantages for the dominant group and disadvantages for minoritized groups. Okay. And the last one here, this one's really quick. The idea that oppression is cultural. And so if you remember this diagram that I showed you here, we said that cultures, often the things that we visibly see and associate with cultures, like the language people speak and the way they might dress, their religious celebrations, their art, their music, their food, all of those things that are very easy to perceive about a culture are really just the surface layer. And the sort of really powerful stuff is below the surface, the stuff that's not very easy to see, the ideas and the beliefs and the values that a certain culture has. And if you think about it, as you go deeper, we see a lot of these very powerful ideas about who people are and how people should behave. And so who people are and how people should behave. And so many of the ideas that might disadvantage minoritized groups are very deeply held parts of culture, right? And so if you think of gender, for instance, all cultures have very powerful rules about what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman, right? And so when we grow up, we're all socialized usually to be one or the other. And those are very powerful ideas. And when people violate those rules, there are kind of very strong reactions to them. And so because a lot of those ideas are very deeply held, they often hold inequalities in place. Okay. And so we definitely see that with gender. We definitely see that with sexuality. Sometimes we see it with race and ethnicity, depending on the society you belong to. But culture can be another aspect of oppression if our cultural values create a situation where one group is advantaged over another, right? And sex or gender is a major part of this. Sexuality is a part of this, and others are as well. Okay, so let's talk about privilege. Actually, wait, I'm going to press pause on that. Are you okay with what we've talked about so far? Do you have some questions? Are you confused about something? Is there something you'd like to say? Is there something I missed that you would like me to mention or talk about or discuss? What do you think? How are we at the moment? There's there's nothing in your mind. Okay. Good to know. It's Monday morning. That happens sometimes. Let's see. Anything else here? Okay. Seems quiet unless you're all typing. Okay. I will, if anything comes up there, I'll address it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about this idea of privilege. Okay, so because again, I think so Casey's good. That's awesome. Tika's good. Rashid's good. Okay, so this concept of privilege was a little bit tricky, I think. What I was hearing you say or write on Friday kind of led me to believe that we're not quite there yet, and so I just want to spend a little more time on it because I think it is important, and it is sometimes a difficult concept to understand. Okay. Okay, so let's deal with it here. So we read this article and I asked you a bunch of questions, right? And so what we said was that privilege was something or a process by which Jimmy's good, all right. Advantages or favors or benefits were given to members of a dominant group at the expense of members of minoritized groups. And this can happen at all levels of society in terms of personal or between people or cultural or institutional. Privilege can be working at all of these different levels, okay? And so, again, in the United States, these are the dominant groups that we're dealing with. And so these people have privilege. These people have opportunities and access to resources, and they're able to live their life in a way that people in minoritized groups are not. Okay. Now, the tricky part about privilege, particularly for dominant groups, is that privilege is usually invisible to them. Okay. And so as a result, people in dominant groups often don't believe that there's anything wrong or that there's anything happening. Okay, so since we've been talking so much about race, and we're going to talk about race for the rest of the week, we'll use that as an example. People who are in dominant groups often don't feel privilege because it's not obvious. Okay, and so if I use myself as an example, I'm living in a country where white people are the dominant group, they have power, and so are men. Men are the dominant group and they have power. So I'm in both of those groups, right? I'm a white man. And so I have advantages in this society that people in minoritized groups don't have. Now, if you were to ask me when this privilege occurred, if you were to ask me how I benefited from being in those social groups, I would have to tell you I'm not sure, because I don't know when my race or my gender has benefited me specifically. I'm sure that it has, but it's not always clear when it's happening. Again, if you get hired for a job, most people don't hire you and say, yeah, we hired you because you're white. People don't say that, and they often don't think that, right? So even though I benefit from living in this society where the social groups I belong to are the ones in power, it's not always easy to see when and how that's happening. And so as a result, many people kind of struggle with the idea of privilege because they don't feel it happening, right? They don't know when it's happening. And so if you don't know when it's happening, it's hard to know that it is, right? And so the metaphor I kind of used here was that it's like a fish swimming in the water, right? And if a fish is swimming in the river and the fish is going in the same direction as the current, it doesn't really feel the water moving at all, right? The fish is just swimming and going where it wants to go, and it doesn't notice anything. But if there's a fish that's swimming against the current and is going in the other direction, then you feel it, right? Then you feel the resistance. And so Privilege is an awful lot like that. If you have it, you often don't notice that it's there because it's kind of helping you go in the direction you want to go. But if you don't have privilege, then you notice it. You notice that it's there. You notice the resistance. Okay? The other tricky part about privilege is that to have it, it is granted to you whether you want those privileges or not. Okay? And so, again, you don't have to, as someone who has privilege, you don't actually have to do anything in order to receive those benefits. And you don't even have to like the fact that you do. It will happen, it just happens anyway, okay? Right, so I said that. Okay, so let me try and map this out for you in a way that is maybe a little more concrete, okay? So there's a couple of elements to privilege, and some of them are external and structural, and some of them are internal or attitudinal. And so some of them have to do with the way that the world is structured and the way that the world works, and some of them have to do with how people feel inside. Okay, those are the two kind of distinctions here. So we can see privilege externally or structurally kind of in the following ways. And again, I'm not going to dig too deeply into these because we'll come back to them as we go forward. One is that the integration of dominant group norms into the structures of society. Okay, and so that means that society is created, society is built in a way that benefits or is the way the dominant group likes it to be, okay? And we can kind of see this in all sorts of different ways. The easiest way that I can think of, just off the top of my head, is Band-Aids, right? So if you cut yourself, if you cut your hand, and you go to the store and you buy some Band-Aids so that you can cover up your cut, what color are Band-Aids? Help me out. What color are Band-Aids? Not the cool Spider-Man ones, the regular ones. Just regular old Band-Aids. What color are they? Usually. What color are Band-Aids usually? They're kind of a brownish color, sort of. Kind of brownish, yeah. They're kind of. Do I have anything that's Band-Aid color? Probably not. So, Band-Aids are usually kind of at least the ones that I've seen. They're kind of like a pinky, fleshy, orangey kind of color, right? And yeah, they're kind of beige maybe. And so why are they all that color for the most part, except for the really cool kids ones that have cartoon characters on them? But why are they all that color? Well, because they're supposed to blend in with your skin, right? And so if I go to the drugstore and I buy Band-Aids and then I cut myself and I put a Band-Aid on, that Band-Aid is that color because they want it to blend in. They don't want it to be obvious that I have a Band-Aid. And so the skin, the tone of them is kind of supposed to be neutral. But again, if you have really dark skin, if you're brown or if you're black, those Band-Aids don't blend in, right? They stand out very, very clearly. But often it's difficult to they don't really make Band-Aids in other colors, as near as I can tell. They're all this one color, and that one color is to blend in with a skin tone that looks like mine, right? And again, why? Because my group is dominant, right? I'm in the dominant group. The dominant group makes band-aids for what they think is the majority skin tone, but there are really no options for others. Here's another easy example for you. Now, in terms of ability, I think all of us, as far as I'm aware anyway, belong to the social group of able-bodied people, okay? Which means that our bodies kind of work in an uninhibited fashion, right? All of us can walk, all of us can see, all of us can hear, all of us can use our hands and arms. Our mobility isn't really compromised in any way, okay? So we all belong to the social group of able-bodied people. Now, if you were to go to school this morning, or if you went to the grocery store, or if you went anywhere in the past few weeks, there was a huge amount of barriers, physical barriers, to your mobility that you walked right by and didn't even think of, okay? And so you go up and down stairs, you go into elevators, you step off curbs, you step up onto curbs, you look both ways to make sure that you don't get run over by traffic. You can hear trucks coming, you can hear a bicycle coming behind you. If you get onto the bus, you sit on the bus and then you get off. There's all kinds of barriers for people who have different types of bodies that you don't notice, okay? So if you're in a wheelchair, for instance, all of those curbs that you have to step up and step down, can't do it, right? You need to find a place where you have a little curb cut or a ramp up onto the curb, right? If your hands don't work, if you can't grab onto things tightly, you can't open a doorknob, so you can't leave a room or enter a room. If you're in a wheelchair, stairs are obviously no good, right? You need a lift or an elevator. If you can't see, then finding your way anywhere is an entirely different set of skills than you and I have. So, if you're carrying a lot of extra weight, if you're really, really big, and you get on the bus, you will notice that the bus seats are very, very narrow, right? Where are you going to sit? And so all of these things are evidence of structural privilege, right? The world is built for people like you and me who can see, who can hear, who can walk around on our 2 feet, who can use our arms and use our hands. The world is built for us. And so because of that, people who are using wheelchairs, people whose hands aren't strong enough to open doorknobs, people who can't see, people who can't hear, people who are carrying a lot of extra weight, those people don't kind of fit into the physical structure of society. And so there are barriers for them, right? There are barriers. Now, recently, depending on where you live, we've made a lot of accommodations for people with different bodies, right? So we do have elevators in places. We do have little curb cuts so you can get up onto the curb. We have ramps. If you press the button to cross the street, it makes a little beeping sound if you can't see. If you get onto buses, sometimes there'll be a little recording that says what bus number it is. All of these things are little accommodations to assist people who are differently abled. But still, we live in a world that's built for people like you and me, right? And so all of those little potential obstacles that differently abled people would have, you didn't notice them. Why? Because you have able-bodied privilege, because the world is built for people like you. And so you can use your eyes and your ears, and you can run upstairs and sit in any chair you want, sit on the bus in any seat you want. You can do those things because the world is specifically designed for people like you. And again, yes, we have some accommodations, but that's a structural privilege, right? You are, the world is made for people like you, not so much made for people with different abilities, okay? The second one is the construction of what's normal and not normal for the dominant group, or by the dominant group. And so part of that goes back to the Band-Aid example. And so what's Band-Aids are made in a normal, quote unquote, skin color. What's a normal skin color? Well, apparently this peachy, fleshy color is, even though if you add up the number of people in the world, the majority of the people don't have skin that's my color. It's a different color. If you look at sex and you look at gender, you'll see that men are in the dominant group. And so men often are the definition of what is the normal, what's the default. And so women are often seen as something different. And so often you see products for women, right? Or for her. You don't often see products for him or for men, because men are assumed to be the normal, the default. And women are seen as the thing that is different. And again, we'll dig into that a little bit more as we go forward. And then finally, the invisibility of privilege for the dominant group. And so dominant groups often don't know that they have privilege because, again, it's invisible. And so think about, again, the able-bodied example I gave you. Your able-bodied privilege is not evident to you in society, right? You go up and down curbs, up and down stairs, you open doors, you look both ways before you cross the street. All of those things are because the world is created for people like you. And so all those benefits that you have of being an able-bodied person, you often don't see them because, again, the world is made for you. Okay. Now we'll talk about the internal and attitudinal dimensions of privilege, okay? So privilege often shows up internally in a number of different ways, and it depends on whether you're in a dominant group or a minoritized group. And so actually, I'm gonna jump ahead here. And so privilege shows up internally, so in people's thoughts and feelings, in different ways depending on whether you're in a dominant group or a minoritized group. And so if you're in the dominant group, this can show up through internalized dominance. And if you are in a minoritized group, it can show up through internalized oppression, okay? And so many of these kind of thoughts and behaviors that occur because of privilege are not on purpose, okay? So people kind of act this way because of the social messages they've received, okay? And it's not usually on purpose, but sometimes it is. Okay, so internalized dominance is how people act, how people think based on the messages that they've received in their culture that they are the superior group, okay? And we often see people acting out their internalized dominance through the things that they say. And so again, some of these things are clearly racist or clearly sexist or clearly intolerant in some ways, but others are a little more difficult to figure out because, again, people aren't necessarily trying to say something. They're just accidentally saying it. They're accidentally demonstrating that a certain group has power in society and another one doesn't, okay? And so many of these are termed or are what people call microaggressions. And so again, they're not clear statements. They're not clear racist or sexist or whatever statements. They're just seemingly innocent things that demonstrate power relationships in society, okay? So here's a few. So if someone comes up to a multiracial person, okay, or a person whose race or ethnicity they're not sure of, and they say, "What are you? What are you anyway?" Um, why is that a problematic thing to say to someone? Okay, so imagine someone sees someone else on the SkyTrain or on the train. They're not sure what their race or ethnicity is, and so they just walk right up and say, "Hey, what are you anyway?" Um, why is that? Why is that a microaggression? Why is that person expressing this internalized dominance? How are they kind of showing their privilege by asking this question? Because it seems like an innocent enough question, but it's really not. There's a message behind it. Okay, what's the problem? What's the message? When someone just walks up to you or to someone else and says, "Hey, what are you anyway?" Maybe this has happened to some of you. What do you think? Are you typing? Or are you not sure? Did you fall asleep? Yeah, that's a good one there, Karen. Yeah. So they want to know if you fit the stereotype of a given ethnicity. Okay. That's good. Let me see if we can get some other stuff. But that's good, Karen. Okay, I'm going to go with this one. So Karen says, yeah, they want to know if you fit the stereotype of a given ethnicity. Yeah, so the idea here is that when someone asks, or when someone is asked, well, what are you anyway? Yeah, it's true, right? They have these sort of culture or ethnic stereotypes, and they want to know which ones they should apply to you, right? And so when this is asked, it's kind of saying, well, what are you? It's almost saying like, I don't know which stereotypes apply to you. Tell me what you are so that I can see you through the lens of my stereotypes, right? Not cool. Actually, what about this one? Lots of people in Vancouver, actually, because Vancouver is a very multicultural and multiracial city. Lots of people get asked, "Oh, where are you from anyway?" And as it turns out, lots of people who are from different races and ethnicities here in Vancouver are actually Canadian and were born here. And in many cases, their parents were born here too. And so, why is this kind of a microaggression? Why is this evidence of internalized dominance when people, non-white people, peoples of color, when they're asked, "Oh, where are you from anyway?" And it turns out they're Canadian. Why is that a microaggression? Why is that an issue? Kansas want to be more dominant. Okay, maybe. Maybe. Kind of the issue here, the underlying message of a statement like that, and again, in a school like Columbia College, it's a fairly safe thing to ask, right? Because all of our students are international; they all come from other countries, and so asking another Columbia College student where they come from is kind of natural because basically everyone comes from somewhere else. But kind of out in the greater world here in Vancouver, it's a bit of a problematic statement because it assumes that to be from here, to be from Canada, it assumes that white people come from here, right? That people who were born here, people who are from Vancouver are white. And if you are not white, if you're a person of color, you must be from somewhere else, right? And so sometimes people, non-white people, people of color, are asked this question, oh, where are you from? And as it turns out, of course, they were born in Canada and their parents were born in Canada. And in some cases, their grandparents were born in Canada, even though ethnically they might be Japanese, or they might be South Asian, or they might be Chinese, or they might be black. They're any sort of non-white race or ethnicity. The question saying, where are you from, implies that you don't belong here, right? That that Canada is white, and to be a person of color means you must have come from somewhere else, and so that can be kind of a hurtful question or a hurtful inquiry. White people rarely get asked where they're from, or if they do, it doesn't carry the same type of feeling or the same emotional weight. Okay, so that's kind of what makes these little microaggressions difficult to pick up, because usually they are kind of innocent questions. Sometimes they're just curious, but because they exist in a context of inequality, they can come off as aggressive, right? They can come off in a negative way. Okay, so I'm going to stop there because I feel like that's a lot. Tomorrow I will have a little, maybe I'll have a couple videos for you to watch just to help outline this, what privilege is a little bit better. And then we'll carry on and we'll start talking about racism tomorrow. I will remind you, of course, that we have a little micro paper to do this week. Some people, I can talk about that a little bit more tomorrow if you like. Only one person sent me an article to look at over the weekend, and I looked at it and I said it was good. So the description of what you're supposed to do, of course, is on Student Portal and is in the Files section of Microsoft Teams. There's also a little bit of a marking guide in there as well that can help you out. Maybe one thing I'll mention is that I described this as a one-page paper. And so I'm thinking like one page, single space. If you go a little bit over, it's okay. Like, it doesn't have to fit on one page. I'm just trying to put a bit of a boundary on it to make sure that you don't write 3 and 4 and whatever number of pages. It's supposed to be pretty much one page. And so again, it doesn't have to fit on one page. That's not a criteria here, but I'm just trying to give you an idea of how big it should actually be. Okay. So those things are posted on Student Portal and on Microsoft Teams and the Files section. I would also like to do, if possible, a little another oral quiz on Friday. Do you think we can do that? Can we do another oral quiz on Friday? think, guys? Yes, no, maybe so? Oops. I'm assuming that's the paper thing that you didn't really do anything on this weekend. Okay. Boss says oops. What else? What topic? The topic can be anything, Karen, that has to do with stereotypes or prejudice or discrimination. Next week for the quiz, maybe. I don't know. Do you guys like Friday quizzes or Monday quizzes better? Sam agrees. Sometimes I've done votes on this in class in the past, and it seems that people often like Friday exams, not Monday ones, but it's not going to be a big one. Okay. People seem to be not too eager to chime in on this, so maybe what we'll do is we'll leave it. We'll talk about it tomorrow. I would like to do another oral quiz with you either at the end of this week or at the beginning of next week. We have this little micro paper to deal with. I can talk about that a little bit tomorrow. Boss says, first we want to see our marks on the first quiz to determine the date. I think I posted them on Student Portal, my friend. Correct me if I'm wrong. Dika says no. Is that no to Monday? Okay. Maybe let's decide on this. Let's decide on this tomorrow, okay? We've got to do one in the next little while. We have that micro paper to deal with, but maybe what we'll do is we'll leave it there today. If you have some questions about the micro paper, well, I'd like it to be due on Friday, Sam, if possible. If you have specific questions about that, you can ask them tomorrow, and I will. I'll speak to them as best I can tomorrow. So, again, the assignment itself is posted in Student Portal and on Microsoft Teams, and you have to find an article and summarize it and respond to it in the paper, okay? And it's just a little one-page thing, not huge. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it there for today. As usual, if you have any questions, you can email me or you can message me later today. But otherwise, I think I will Friday quizzes because the week is already ruined. Okay. Yeah, okay. The week is already ruined. You're very welcome, Jenna. Okay, we'll talk more about this tomorrow. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for participating. We'll start on the racism stuff tomorrow, and I'll see you all then, and I'll see some of you in 10 minutes or so in comparative cultures, okay? So have a good day, everyone. Happy Monday, and yeah, see you.